Hello and welcome back to Pack the Rock Podcast, Episode 3. I am your host, Carlo Barone, joined alongside Max Parker and Evan Gerike of the Hoosier Network. How are we feeling this week, guys?
Hi, Carlo.
Hi.
We're feeling good, I think. It's week 3. It's Western Kentucky week. We stayed nice and dry for Idaho, which is really the biggest thing.
That was so nice to have a roof. What do you guys say? Quick poll.
Rough.
Roof.
I had to think about that one, though.
Like
it's
a dog.
definitely roof.
Like
I
a
will
dog.
say, though, I did go to the women's soccer game on Sunday and got poured on, so I didn't stay dry all
So it
weekend.
evens out.
Yeah. I think that was karma for having a press box for Idaho.
I'm searching in Western Kentucky, and I accidentally typed Western Wentucky.
Western Wincut.
I didn't know that's who
Western
they played this week.
Wenhunty.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Carlo put
I know what
Cincinnati
I almost
preview on the podcast notes, so.
We're all. You don't
Did
need.
I?
You don't need to.
Oh, I
Carlo.
did.
They can't see that.
I did. Oops. Well,
Anyways,
you guys haven't figured out, it's Western Kentucky week, so it's not Cincinnati week.
Not yet.
Shocker to some.
Cincinnati's on our mind. They announced the schedule. We're talking about going to Cincinnati, planning that out. So it's Western Kentucky at home at noon
On Saturday. At Memorial Stadium. Wow, we
In
didn't even plan that,
Wow.
Evan. Let's
in
go.
Bloomington, because I learned there's. Never mind.
There's
Let's
a
just
lot
talk
of
about
Memorial
the
Stadium.
podcast.
There's one in Illinois. Illinois has a
Nebraska.
Memorial Stadium and Assembly Hall.
Well, they want to be us.
They do.
What? Or no, they
I
definitely
guess
want to
now
be us.
it's like the State Farm Hall or something. But
Ew. Well, besides Cincinnati and Illinois and all that stadium talk,
No, Western Kentucky, Carlo.
no, I'm getting there.
Oh, okay.
But
I'll let you go.
before we talk about Western Kentucky, we've got to talk about last weekend where IU played a football game and they played against Idaho, and the score was oddly really close, 35-22. Indiana won. It was a back and forth game. It was our first game we all worked together. I thought we did a great job coverage wise, so pat ourselves in the back. But it was a close game in the first half. It was 10-0. And they, without a third quarter explosion, this podcast might be a lot different this week. So,
Yeah.
just what were your guys' initial reactions to just the game?
I'll start off with Zoinks. That was
Oh, that was exactly what I was thinking too.
an inch liar. Liar. That's my word. No, it's Scooby Doo's word. It's Scooby Doo's word. Anyway.
it's technically Shaggy's.
Oh
word,
yeah,
not
I guess it
Scooby-Doo.
is. What do I know?
Jinkies.
Anyways, my glasses, Jinkies, Scooby Doo pod. Yeah, I mean the first half was not pretty at all. They just couldn't get anything going. I don't have the drives pulled up, but it felt like every time Western Kentucky would deal a blow on offense, Indiana had no response, and that was just a rough. What are you grinning at?
You said Western Kentucky.
Now I'm confused. Every time Idaho, every oh goodness. Anytime the Vandals, there we go, Max, they would deliver a blow. Indiana just had no response, and something shifted at half where that changed.
Yeah, I mean it was baffling sitting in the press box trying to figure out what was going on, why Indiana couldn't do anything on offense against Idaho, and we weren't really sure where Idaho was on the scale of being good after almost beating Washington State, who then knocked off Wisconsin, and there's kind of that. So, it's still early in the season, but Indiana should be taking care of a team like Idaho fairly easily. We talked last week about last year's game and how it was a lot of special teams work that kind of made that one look worse than it was. This one probably it's really kind of hard to judge. Was the third quarter, the fourth quarter wasn't even great for Indiana, but was the third quarter more of what we should be expecting from this team going forward, or is it the first half? And if it's the first half, you're in trouble when it comes to the Big Ten if you can't handle Idaho.
I think a lot of people, and I can speak for myself too, after the season that Indiana had last year, going 2-10, and one of their 2 wins was against Idaho, and they demolished them. And thinking it's only been one game before this one against Illinois, they've beaten a Big Ten opponent, so everyone kind of just assumes that they were better than last year, and at least in my mind. So I thought this game was just going to be blown out of the water right away. But it took until the third quarter. And like you mentioned, Indiana didn't even really have that good of a fourth quarter. In my eyes, they won the game, but they only won the third quarter. If you take out the third quarter, that game is all Idaho. They played a lot better than a lot of people thought. And it surprised me watching the game because I thought we all predicted that it was going to be a game just blown out of the water. So talking about that first half, why do you guys just think the offense and the team struggled so much?
I do want to say before we move back to the first half, the fourth quarter, it is a little hard to say like IU totally lost because they were clearly just trying to run out the clock. They didn't attempt a single pass. This is not a team that was trying to run up a score. I think if they were, you would have seen Indiana put up closer to 50 points if they were at their third quarter. They carried that momentum into the fourth quarter. It would have been different, but they definitely did adjust the kind of game planning to work on the offensive line and running the ball and just getting out of the game after a game that was wet and rainy, and you don't want to get too many injuries against Idaho. So there's clearly an adjustment there. But the first half, I mean, it was just basically never got settled. And they talked after the game about how he's a very, calm guy, and they've said this after both games so far, how he never gets rattled or panicked or whatever, and that really kind of helps them as a team stay calm. But at the same time, you almost should be a little bit rattled when you're playing that bad because it should shock you into playing better. And it is just you're watching these passes sail over wide open guys' heads, and the interception late in the second half was something that he had plenty of room to find. I think it was Cam Camper who was throwing to.
Just overthrew it. Plenty of room to find him, and it could have been close to a touchdown because there's only really that one man to beat. And I mean, it was bad. It was bad all around.
It was. And I think one thing that I noticed early on from the Illinois game was just the fact that some of Bazelak's passes were just airmailed. And that kind of came through a little bit more against Idaho, which is the opposite of what you want to happen. We talked about how this should be a game where they really find their groove, and it's an opportunity for them to really work on stuff. And that just didn't happen. And I think another thing is that run game, it took a while once again to get established. And if you look at time of possession, it's in favor by about 15 minutes to Idaho, which is just not what we were expecting, not what we were saying needed to happen for Indiana, because what you would have liked to see is an improvement upon last year, which, again, it's tough to kind of improve upon because they had so much success against Idaho last year, beating them 56-14. But what you needed to see, and if you're an IU fan, what you wanted to see was that IU controls the game in all facets, on offense, defense, and special teams. And that wasn't the case.
I get having slow starts in games. It happens to teams all the time, especially when they're supposed to blow a team out of the water. But it almost felt like this game, IU had too slow of a start. It felt like going into halftime, I honestly did not know who was going to win the game. I thought IU might get their stuff together in the third quarter, but it was a little too long for people's liking on whether who they think was going to win. And I'm glad that someone mentioned the running game, because you look at the rush yards that Indiana had. Yeah, they outdid Idaho 239 to 126, and with most of that coming through Shivers. But Shivers, a lot of that was on one long run in the third quarter when they were breaking the game open. So they had a slow start with the running game, and Shivers, yes, he had a big game, but if they played a Big Ten team next week, I would not trust Indiana's rushing offense as of right now. Now, they still have two more games against, we've mentioned it 1,000 times, Cincinnati and Western Kentucky this weekend, but they need to clean up the running game, I think, and they need to have a dominant performance. I think this would be the week to do it if they're going to, especially with Western Kentucky's defense that we'll talk about later and how dangerous they can be. So, on to what the second half was for the Hoosiers. Obviously, they played a lot better. They blew the game open in the third quarter. And Tom Allen mentioned after the game in the press conference that the third quarter is what the team envisioned the first quarter to be, but it just didn't occur till then. So they made some halftime adjustments, and they got the game back under control. But just what do you guys think they did better in the second half other than the first to turn the game around?
Yeah, it was interesting because Allen didn't say that he, yelled at the team or that some, captain on the team stood up and told everyone to get their act together. It seemed very much like the whole team just as one was like, yeah, we need to be better. We're going to be better. And then came out and they were better. And that's a good sign, at least. And Allen talked about that, how they bounced back, how they dug themselves out of that hole is really important. It just seemed like I think the weather had part of it. There really wasn't the rain in the second half, and Bazelak clearly felt more comfortable throwing the ball, and they just kind of started finding holes with the run game. I mean, Shivers did have 5 runs over 10 yards, a few big bursts. It wasn't just that long one. He had the 46-yard one right at the end of the third quarter, but I think he had a 31-yard rush earlier in the game too, and just the whole team seemed to really kind of come together, and it really started with some big catches that were made. DJ Matthews had those really 2 acrobatic catches on back-to-back plays that put him in a really nice spot in the red zone and allowed the whole team to just kind of settle down. And then once they scored that touchdown, and then you get the safety shortly after that, and your whole team's just settled in, and it's like, okay, we are Indiana playing Idaho. And AJ Barner said it. He was like, no offense to Idaho, but we knew we have to be beating this team.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if it was something that one of the players, as you mentioned, said at halftime, but going off of that A.J. Barner quote, I mean, it just seemed like they found their spark in the second half, and that was very similar to how it was against Illinois. The first play that comes to mind thinking about Illinois was that first deep ball to DJ Matthews from Bazelak. That kind of got things going for them against Illinois. And again, as you mentioned, Evan, that was what got things rolling against Idaho too. I think it just comes down to consistency. You need to be able to find that again against any team in the first half. And we saw that against Illinois where they were able to find those big plays in the first half, and then there was just nothing in the first half against Idaho, and that's something that you can't come out flat, especially against. Yes, Western Kentucky graduated a lot, some of their big playmakers, especially their QB, Bailey Zappi, but you can't continue to come out slow as the competition gets better and better as the year goes on.
You see it all the time in the NFL that a team will be favored going into the game, and then they'll play well towards the end, but they didn't put it together in the first half, and they'll lose. I think Indiana, if they're going to beat Western Kentucky, knowing what we know about them, especially with how close the game was last year, obviously they've had players leave, like you said, but they're still a very well-coached team. Tom Allen talked about the press conference on Monday. They need to play a full game of 4 quarters, and they have not done that yet through 2 games. They played a pretty bad second half against Illinois with a 175-yard drive at the end of the game, just putting a Band-Aid over the entire second half. And then you have the first half just flop that Indiana had against Idaho. And, I mean, the third quarter kind of saved them there. With teams coming up in the schedule like Western, like Cincinnati, Nebraska, and the Big Ten schedule, they're going to have to play a full 4-quarter performance in order to stay in the game and win some of these games if they're going to. But one person that I thought stood out was Deshaun McCullough, the 4-star freshman that IU had, and though he's just played 2 games so far this season, I thought his best game was on Saturday when he had 2 sacks and 5 tackles. So, I mean, it looked like he was in the backfield a lot of plays. Even if he wasn't getting a sack or the tackle, he definitely was pressuring the quarterback. So just what do you guys see from the pass rush and him in general?
I think with Deshaun, something that stands out to the coaching staff and is very notable and important was how they discussed how much he came in ready to learn and grow. Sometimes, and I'm not involved with like programs or anything, so I don't have firsthand experience, but you do hear about some guys, highly touted recruits, who come in having dominated their entire high school career, and they come in thinking they have it already. It's a great sign that McCullough is coming in, again, dominating in high school, but he's here to learn as well. And he's here to grow, and that's really showing. And I mean, he's a guy who, if he's already becoming a leader on the field, personality-wise off the field, this could be a huge asset for this program this season, down the stretch, and for years to come if you get a guy who's already becoming a leader right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, he's a playmaker. And it's easy to see that when he's on the field. I mean, he's only a freshman. He's played 2 games, and he's picking up a lot of the slack that Indiana's missing with Micah McFadden out. I mean, the 2 sacks were huge. He just felt like he was all over the place, creating a ton of havoc, and really for having so much room to still grow as, you know, a football player as his time at IU, he's already one of the most impressive players on the field, and I think it's just going to get better, and it's really impressive to see what he's doing and how much he's bought into the system, how much he's bought into Tom Allen, how much he's bought into Indiana being a team that can win the Big Ten while he's here. He wants that. He's talked about that. That's his goal. They asked him about a personal goal of his at the press conference, and he was like, I don't really have any personal ones. It's just to win the Big Ten. And that attitude is huge for someone who's going to be when you're trying to recruit guys in the future, it's going to be big to be able to point to him and be like, this is the kind of guy that we're turning into someone who, at this rate, looks likely to be drafted already. He's got that kind of potential.
Yeah.
And when you can point to someone and say, this is what happens when you buy into this program, you're going to get more guys like that, more guys who want to do that, more guys who, alongside Deshaun in the future, can really help Indiana get back up out of the pits as they've been the last season 2 games so far.
I'm glad you said that Allen mentioned that he's bought in, because Allen in the press conference raved about him taking the walkthroughs with the same mindset as you would going through a practice or a game. He said he's a very good practice player, which reflects well in why he gets more snaps in the games. And obviously his talent and skill definitely helps with that. But he's played a lot, and Allen trusts him already, I would say, through 2 games to play a significant amount of snaps, and he looks like a game wrecker so far. So enough with Idaho. Moving on to Western Kentucky, as we've said 1,000 times already this podcast. IU did beat them last season, 33-31 on the road, and that game was wild. I remember watching it, and it was just back and forth, and it went down to the wire. So now they play again this year, and this weekend they play at Memorial Stadium instead. So what do you guys think they'll have to do, or Indiana is going to have to do, to win their 3rd straight game to open their 2022 season?
The first thing they need to do is score on, I would say, the first 2 possessions. Even if it's 2 field goals or a touchdown and field goal, ideally 2 touchdowns, that will be massive for this team after struggling to get started so much against Idaho. That really dug them in a hole that Western Kentucky probably wouldn't let them get out of as easily as Idaho did. If you can come out and Bazelak's hitting his throws on the first couple drives and drives the team down the field to put them in a position to take an early lead or get on the board early, that'll be huge for the confidence for this team moving forward throughout the rest of the game, where they can build off of that. And that's something that Indiana was really good at last year, was coming out at the beginning of the game and on that scripted first drive, march down the field and put points on the board. And that's probably one of the only things scoring-wise Indiana was good at last year, was that first drive to start the game, and oftentimes the first drive to start the second half, where they could put that drive together in pieces before the game even started and before it was kind of under the pressure of a snap clock. And if, like, Indiana needs to keep doing that. They need to come out and just kind of get started in order to kind of establish themselves earlier in the game, so you're not reeling on your back heels and your defense doesn't have to try to do too much to keep you in it, and all of a sudden you're falling behind and there's just too much to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are 2 different points that I want to make on both sides of the ball. Offensively, you have to be careful with the ball. This is a Western Kentucky team that has, I believe it's 9 or 10 turnovers already in the first 2 games, which is at the top of the FBS. And so you can't be airmailing things long, because, I mean, there's a good chance that if something's not on target, there's a Western Kentucky guy who's there ready to pick it off. You can't have some of the fumble issues that you had. So you just got to take care of the football. And that kind of goes into, you don't want to be giving this Western Kentucky offense extra possessions. They may have graduated Bailey Zappi, but Austin Reed, the new guy, has had 4 touchdowns last week to only 1 interception. He had 3 passing touchdowns in the first week against Hawaii. And, I mean, there are some familiar faces in Davian Irvin Poindexter from last year, who's now on Western Kentucky.
On scholarship, too.
Yeah, on scholarship. So he's
Good for him.
Yeah, it's good for him, and it'll be fun. It's a fun story to watch, but they have weapons on receiving. Dawood Davis had 124 yards last week, 1 touchdown. Malachi Corley, who was there both these guys were there last year. Malachi Corley had 3 touchdowns last week. So on defense, they can force turnovers. On offense, they have weapons and they can score. So you've got to be focused. You can't be making the same mental mistakes and mistakes in plays that you made against Idaho, because they're going to make you pay for it.
I think Western Kentucky, if Indiana does have a slip up, they would be the team to take advantage of it.
Absolutely.
Like you mentioned, they have forced 9 turnovers in 2 games, which is insane because that's a lot of turnovers for only 2 games. Mm-hmm. So if Indiana's not careful, they could cough up the ball. I think if they win the turnover battle, they will win the game. If they lose the turnover battle, I think they'll lose the game. Plain and simple, my take. Another question, just for the Hoosiers, who do you think has to be the X factor for Indiana? Who has to play well for them to win this game?
I mean, it's been a little bit since we've seen Tywan Mullen assert his. Sorry, it's just kind of where you go to. You haven't seen him this season totally assert his dominance, and in some situations, there have been 2 that I can recall where Tom Allen is just going at him for getting a little lost in coverage or just some sort of mistake. So I think this is an opportunity for him to really, the last non-conference game before you go against Cincinnati and then into the Big Ten slate, where he can really show that he's back himself to what he was when he was an All-American in 2020. I mean, I think he's really got to show out and eliminate the number 1 options for Austin Reed.
Yeah, I'll add a few more points onto that, and then I'll pick someone else. But we saw him a little bit, I think maybe twice in the Idaho game. The interception he had that was called back, we saw him run for about 60 yards, and that didn't count at all. And then I think he had one of the blown coverage plays that allowed Idaho to score in the 4th quarter, one of the 12 points they scored there. So you definitely want to see Taiwan, lean more towards the interception side and probably hoping that it counts. But I just think the guy you really want to see take over the game is Sean Shivers. Mm-hmm. He had 144 yards against Idaho. I think it was something around 86, 89 yards after contact, which is really big. It's still against Idaho, and we know, maybe it's a little harder to tackle a guy like that for a team like that. But Sean Shivers needs to have another big game like that. Yeah. 100-yard rushing day for Indiana is kind of rare. And the more you can see of that, the better off Indiana is. And Western Kentucky's given up a lot of yards on the ground. They average about 319 yards for defensive, 319 yards allowed in a game. And if Shivers can kind of exploit those gaps, and obviously you'll see a little bit of Henderson and maybe even a little bit of Jalen Lucas, but Shivers is your guy. He talked about how, he just goes out and he knows he has a job to do, and you want to see Shivers really kind of take control to allow that passing game to open up so that they have to respect, play action or whatever else, and they crowd the box a little bit more, and then Bazelak's allowed to find those open guys in the backfield and kind of spread out their defense so that they don't have those guys ball hawking and getting more interceptions as they've been so good at so far.
Yeah, and I want to touch on one more thing. I don't know if we have as our next segment is the X Factor. I don't know if that's where we're going to go next, but I'm going to jump the gun here and just say I think a really, really important factor in this game is going to be the defensive line for Indiana. Western Kentucky has a few highly graded guys in pass blocking, just in the offensive line as a whole. And by the time this is out, I'm doing a story this week, just kind of talking about how Indiana wants to face off against this offensive line, because the offensive line plays as a group. They play really cohesively and together. And so it's going to be important for this defensive line to play well together and kind of iron out those kinks that they've had against Illinois and Idaho. It's time for them to play a complete game.
I'm glad you said defensive line because I was going to say the player that I think has to play well. I mean, he's played well the first 2 games, but I think Cam Jones has been arguably Indiana's, or at least one of them, their best players up to this point. And if Indiana wants to keep winning, I think he's going to have a stellar game. He's going to have to pressure their quarterback because like you mentioned, their offensive line is very talented and they're also very well coached. Tom Allen has raved about, I'm not exactly sure of Western Kentucky's head coach's name, but he has raved about their program and how they conduct themselves. And with all these players leaving, for them to still be almost as high-powered as an offense as they were last year with their quarterback gone, that's got to be a testament to the coach and how they run stuff over at Western Kentucky. So I think Cam Jones is going to have to step up, and he's going to have to be a game wrecker. So the final note on the Western Kentucky game, our predictions. Who do you guys think is going to win? And you guys know the drill. Give me a score.
Yeah, you want to go first, Max?
I can.
Okay.
I can. I am very close to picking Western Kentucky. I'm not going to, because I think this team, Indiana, just feels very motivated. The feeling around the team is very motivated. Tom Allen seemed pissed after the game. And I think there's a feeling, at least from their coaching staff, that this is not a game that they can afford to come into with a lack of focus. So I think they're going to come in motivated, and I think that's going to show. I think it's going to be close like last year. I think it's going to be within a touchdown. So I'm going to put it right at that mark. I think it's going to be 38-31.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lesson to be taken from the Idaho game, and it's really to be seen yet if Indiana is going to take that lesson. And you saw them come out in the second half, and it was like, oh, this kind of shocked our system. And now you're looking to see if it shocked their system for the season or just for the one half for Idaho. Are they looking at Western Kentucky like, oh, this is a team that can beat us? We saw what happened when we don't play our best against Idaho. We can't do that again. Or was it, I just don't think we can't lose to Idaho, and that's what I'm focused on. So I'm going to come out in the second half and then whatever for Western Kentucky. And whether or not they learn that lesson is going to decide this game, obviously, whether they can come out and start quickly. Yeah. I am going to hold out faith that Indiana will learn that lesson. I as Max, you said, I'm also close to picking Western Kentucky to win this one. I think this was a Western Kentucky team that was almost better last year, and Indiana still kind of was able to put together enough to knock them off. If Bazelak throws for 250 yards, Indiana's in a really good shape, and I think you'll see him hit that number. I'm going to go with 31-28 Indiana.
Yeah, that's good. And I just want to make one note here. If they don't show improvement from last year, then I think that's where next week we start picking not Indiana, because
I already picked not Indiana once, but
well, there you go. Well, that's where I will be switching is now you have 3 teams in a row that you played last year, and the first game did not go as well as last year did. So I think this is going to be a real test to see what they can bring moving forward,
especially against a team like Western Kentucky that is, probably the second weakest team on the schedule, just based on the fact that they're not a Power 5 school. And I may be selling them a little bit short. They were 9-5 last year. They won a bowl game. They were pretty good. But you've got to beat those teams on your schedule in order to hold up against the Cincinnatis, against the Nebraskas, against the Rutgers. And
Nebraska.
Yeah, Nebraska.
See ya, Scott Frost.
That's a conversation for 2 weeks.
See ya.
Yeah. So Indiana's just got to be able to prove that they can hold up, that they can win the games on the schedule that they're supposed to win in order for them to have a chance to beat the teams that maybe they're not expected to. And Western Kentucky is, I believe, the favorite in this game. I think it's a 58% chance that they win this game. I don't know what the betting line is for Western Kentucky.
Indiana's favored in the line.
Okay, I just saw it was like a percentage of chance that they would win. It was like Western Kentucky was 58, and for Indiana that should put a chip on your shoulder.
Yeah.
You know, this group of 5 teams going to come into my stadium and everyone thinks they're going to beat us.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. That's how you should be looking at the game of a chance to really show off that, you know, this is a different team from last year.
Yeah. So Indiana, just a quick note, and then we'll hear Carlo's prediction, but just a quick note, Indiana is a 6.5-point favorite, and they are favored to win.
Okay.
6.5.
Mm-hmm. As of
Interesting.
2 days ago, the line might have moved.
Well, like you guys have said, I think that this game is going to be a lot closer than a lot of people think. I think that it's going to be less than a touchdown, as Max had said earlier. I think the final score will be 35-32, and Indiana will be 3-0 after this week. But I am purely saying that because I think IU is going to start out hot, and then they're going to slowly just start losing their lead, but they're going to hold on at the end. We've seen that before, and I think Indiana is going to win this game, but I don't think it's going to be easy, and I think it's going to be a competitive game, and it's going to be close for a lot of it, but I think Indiana will come out on top because I do feel like at the end of the day, they do have, I would say, the more skilled players and the better coach. So, and they're also at home. They've got momentum. They've already won their first 2 games. I think Indiana is going to win this one in a close battle, and it's going to be a gritty game. I think it's going to be 35-32.
We're all pretty close in the scores again. We did the same thing last week, and I said after the recording stopped, I was like, I wish that I hadn't gone first because I thought I was going to be the one who was really out there by saying Idaho wouldn't score, and then
My prediction sucked.
Yeah,
Those were bad.
They were. I mean, it was only 10-0 at halftime. Everyone's talking about how bad the first half was because I think they were expecting Indiana to win, 66-3.
Yeah.
It was
3.
the defense still did look good. They did play kind of around the level. I think those last 2 touchdowns, obviously Tom Allen won it back, but the fourth quarter just got kind of weird because the game had swung so much from feeling like Indiana was out of it to feeling like it was already over that I think the whole defense just kind of let off the gas a little bit.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I think it was a little bit closer in the range of what you were expecting than you saw because of how bad that first half felt. Mm-hmm. But we were definitely way off in the predictions. So maybe we just need to stop. We need to stop being so close in predictions and having the same mindset going into these games.
We'll spice.
I think
Next
once we
week,
get
Indiana 68-3 over Cincinnati.
Boom.
Hot take
Actually,
already.
I think the Indiana football team is going to break the points record in a game that Georgia Tech has against Cincinnati. 226-0.
Whoa.
I think next week, bold take, Indiana wins on the road against Cincinnati.
Why are we talking about this now?
227-0.
So that we can cut it out of the podcast.
I'm putting my stock in now for IU. They're going to win this weekend an exact way I said, 35-32. They're going to win the exact way because they're listening. Then next week, 227-0. Bold take. Oh, hello.
Oh, my God.
Bold take.
Whichever one is closer on our Cincinnati prediction, you have to do my homework if you're wrong.
Oh,
Yep.
I can do your homework, but I don't know about the grade.
Okay, fair.
We'll see.
I'll give you some completion ones just to get it out of the way.
There you go.
I don't know how I feel about that. We'll talk.
Well, apparently, you're very confident on your prediction, so
It's a bold take. It is a very, very. I understand the boldness of the take, but it's a take, and I'm gonna own it. So, I think we'll have to just see how IU does this weekend before we all go to Cincinnati on our first road trip together. So, road trip. Thank you for tuning in to episode 3 of Pack the Rock podcast, presented by the Hoosier Network. I've been your host, Carlo Barone, joined alongside Max Parker and Evan Gerike of the Hoosier Network. Thank you guys, and we will see you guys next week.